The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Donald Trump is going to be commandeering all of television, or at least all of it that has decided to go along with this very obvious publicity stunt that he's doing, with the goal of fear-mongering about the non-existent immigration crisis that Trump has fabricated in order to justify taking money, potentially through the use of a national emergency declaration, for his U.S.-Mexico border wall, over which he has already shut down the government. And most media outlets are effectively complicit in this. And I'll talk about that, how that works in a second. From the beginning of Trump's campaign, he fear-mongered around immigration. You'll remember Mexico sending rapists and criminals who bring drugs and crime. We will shut down Muslim immigration until we can figure out what the hell is going on. We want people from Norway, not from shithole countries like Haiti. You can say that now because it's quoting the president. We will build a wall and Mexico will pay for it. And then it became clear that Mexico was never going to pay. So Trump instead demanded money from you, the taxpayer. He couldn't get it, so he shut down the government, which has now gone on for more than 2 weeks. And now Donald Trump announced in a tweet yesterday that he will address the nation tonight on television, saying, quote, "I am pleased to inform you," isn't he really, "that I will address the nation," capital A on address. Why? We will never know. "On the humanitarian and national security crisis on our southern border, Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. This is propaganda. This is a propaganda speech. The presidential Oval Office evening address is or should be reserved for actual crises or announcements of consequence. So I disagreed with going to war with Iraq, but I didn't disagree with the use of the Oval Office nighttime address for George W. Bush to communicate that on his orders, bombings had started in Iraq in a lead up to our occupation there. When President Obama announced that Osama bin Laden had been killed, although it wasn't at the Oval Office, it was an evening presidential address, a short one, from the White House. So what Donald Trump is doing is he is holding hostage the imagery of the big presidential announcement on national television to lie and to tell us that this non-existent immigration crisis is a crisis when it's not. And that gets us to the networks and the TV channels who are complicit by covering it if they don't live fact check, which I hope that they will, because he's going to lie his ass off. And this is where I'm thinking of doing a live stream tonight, during which I will live fact check Donald Trump's predicted to be 8-minute statement to the American people. The reality is, of course, that border crossing attempts are at historic lows and have been declining since before Donald Trump came into office. So the idea that border crossings are down merely because people are scared of Trump, that's not true. We have a net outflow of undocumented immigrants to Mexico rather than coming in from Mexico. Undocumented immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than American-born citizens. They pay into social welfare programs that they're never going to get benefits out of. The agriculture and restaurant industries, just to name two, would be crippled without undocumented immigrants, and of course, without documented immigrants. There is no crisis, but ABC and CBS and NBC and Fox Network and Fox News and CNN and MSNBC, they are all going to be carrying the speech. So Donald Trump is successfully commandeering television for a pet project waste of money that he has concocted. I'll remind you, because it's not just about evaluating how networks will cover tonight's address, but it's also about the hypocrisy that is there in their decision to air it at all. When President Obama wanted to address the nation about executive actions on immigration, many major networks said, we're not going to air it because it's, quote, overtly political. A fake border crisis, possibly culminating in Trump declaring a national emergency in order to get money for his wall, is the most political way I can imagine of dealing with the issue. And we will see, Pat, how these channels deal with it. I would rather them not air it at all and later tell us what was said and the truth or falsity of it, If they're going to do it, they should live fact check. I don't know if they will.
For a few hours yesterday, there was a question over whether the networks would air the speech, and I was really hoping that they would decide not to because it's so overtly political and because there's no real crisis at the border. But CBS decided to air it, and then the other networks followed suit. I hope that at least like CNN does that live side-by-side fact-check thing. They did a similar thing with Sarah Huckabee Sanders at a press conference. At least do that, or give Pelosi, Schumer, and the Democrats equal time to give their side of things.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that, the equal time idea, on today's bonus show. And I'll mention right before tweeting about the address, which we were told again will last 8 minutes, Trump tweeted that the news media are crazed lunatics and the enemy of the people. And now that same news media is doing Trump's bidding. So I may do a YouTube live stream and I will live fact check if so. My hope is that the address in the history books will be seen as historians as a turning point and a major political mistake. We'll see about that. There's a Jonathan Chait article in New York Magazine called "Trump Literally Did Not Understand What a Shutdown Would Do." And it points out that the shutdown continues. We're now beyond 2 weeks. And it's increasingly clear that much like Donald Trump's tariffs, Donald Trump, number one, doesn't understand what a shutdown actually is. And number two, Donald Trump has no plan for getting out of the shutdown, because now it's this situation where Democrats just don't want to give him the money for the wall, period, because they think it's bad policy. And Trump can't appear to be the weak guy by accepting an end to the shutdown without money for the wall. So we get to where we are now, which is a presidential address tonight, possibly to declare a national emergency in justifying seizing money for that wall. So we end up with Trump saying he'd be fine with months or years of a shutdown if that's what it takes. And I've mentioned before that most of the government isn't actually shut down during the shutdown. But some stuff actually is shut down, and shut down with consequence. So, for example, the Washington Post is now reporting that the Trump administration didn't realize that during a government shutdown, 38 million Americans lose their food stamps. During a shutdown, thousands of tenants could be evicted without the help that they would otherwise be able to get from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Washington Post explains that the Trump administration is only now realizing that this happens, and now they're trying to figure out, without ending the shutdown, how can we help some of these people who are being hit really hard by the effects of the shutdown that we've decided to do. Knowing Trump, he likely was thinking back to that short few days of shutdown in early 2018, and he thought not much really happened, so not much will happen if this lasts weeks or months or whatever. Except after a few days, things do actually start to go haywire. People going hungry. Not having food stamps means they'll stop spending money, their food stamp money, at grocery stores, which is bad for the grocery stores. You've got the TSA working without pay and starting to stage days where they all call out sick. This could spill over and impact air travel, which would cripple industries. Tax refunds will be in jeopardy once the filing window opens in February and people can start filing their taxes and expecting refunds. What will happen when people can't get their tax refunds because government is shut down? And just like with the tariffs, there was no thinking before the shutdown about how it would work. There's also no thinking about what the off-ramp is. And I think it's important to mention as well, Mitch McConnell has to be blamed. It's not just Trump. Unlike Trump, Mitch McConnell does know how government shutdowns work, and he's refusing to put up bills to a vote to reopen government. So this might not accomplish anything either way. Trump might not care if McConnell wants to reopen government. But if we actually had Republicans, other than like the lone couple of voices that are out there saying we should reopen government, if Republicans and Democrats were pushing for a reopening of government without necessarily having to fund the wall, it maybe would serve as some pressure on Donald Trump. Would a red state airport shutting down be what it takes to get government reopened, Pat? Maybe. But what's increasingly clear is that he doesn't even understand the consequences of his actions. And the only lens through which he makes these decisions is the political lens and the lens of, will I seem like the winner or the loser in the end?
Yeah, government shutdown is very serious, especially once it gets into weeks and months into that time range. And House Democrats have tried to pass several bills that would reopen parts of the government, like agriculture and the Treasury and Justice Department, the stuff that has nothing to do with the wall. Like, you can save that conversation for later, keep the debate going on whether or not we should have a wall and whether or not we should fund the Department of Homeland Security until that debate's over with. But Republicans are having none of it, of course.
Republicans having none of it. And of course, the House Democrats within hours of taking control of the House, passing a bill that would have reopened government. But McConnell's not hearing it. Trump's not hearing it. So anyway, Trump didn't know what would happen during a shutdown. He probably still doesn't even really get it. And all that matters is, will he come away feeling that he won, or will he come away feeling that he lost? Nothing else will matter. Not the people going hungry, not the fact that this could cripple air travel. None of it makes a difference to him. It is truly Idiocracy 2019. Send me your thoughts. How long will this go on? What will it take to end the shutdown? I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and we have just a tremendous program for you today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Dennis McDonald. Dennis, thank you. Thank you for supporting the David Pakman Show. This is a building year to be the best positioned as possible for 2020, which will be a very big year politically. Also want to say thanks to Eric Stifler, who's today's longtime sustaining member of the day, with us for almost 5 years. Dennis and Eric, thank you. 246 new members in January so far. 246, and it is only January 8th. Our goal was 250 new members with this amazing 2019 membership special that we're running. Only 4 more. Email me if you want one of those incredibly discounted 2019 memberships. David at davidpakman.com. Let me know. Otherwise, just go to www.joinpakman.com and sign up, because it is all happening with membership and the world famous bonus show, which is overhyped, but very much worth the cost, as we recently heard from a David Pakman Show member. Okay, today I'm going to present to you possibly the most audacious lie of the Donald Trump presidency. And you might hear that and say, hold on a second, David, that sounds very hyperbolic. I know that with a guy who lies this much, how can I really say this one lie is the most daring and fearless and presumptive? Well, it is. Donald Trump gave this gong show press conference in the Rose Garden on Friday. And yesterday, I played a 3-minute clip of him not answering a very straightforward question about Mexico paying for the U.S.-Mexico border wall when he was confronted by CNN reporter Caitlin Collins. I've now had more of an opportunity to review the full insanity of this press conference. And one of the other claims that Donald Trump made during the speech is that some other former presidents plural, you'll note, told Trump that they wish they had built the border wall when they were presidents and that they support Trump doing it. Okay, take a look at this moment in Donald Trump's press conference.
But I think we're probably talking about steel, because I really feel the other side feels better about it. And I can understand what they're saying. It is more expensive. We mentioned the price, that we want $5.6 billion, very strongly, because numbers are thrown around, 1.6, 2.1, 2.5. This is national security we're talking about. We're not talking about games. We're talking about national security. This should have been done by all of the presidents that preceded me, and they all know it. Some of them have told me that we should have done it. So we're not playing games. We have to do it.
So if this is not true, it's an extraordinarily audacious thing to say, because these are former presidents. They have spokespeople. They have public personas. What they say is of consequence. And if they don't support the wall, if they didn't tell Donald Trump that he should do it or that they wish they had done it, that's a pretty big deal. If indeed former presidents did support Trump's policy, that actually would also be important, right? That could change public opinion. If it were true that Obama and George W. Bush regretted not building a wall and support Trump doing it, that actually could conceivably change public opinion. So this is a big deal. It happens not to be true. All 4 former living former presidents, I guess is the right way to say it, have said it definitely wasn't them who told Trump that they support his U.S.-Mexico border wall. We heard from Bill Clinton's spokesman, who immediately said this isn't true. Clinton hasn't spoken to Trump since the inauguration. We saw video of Clinton and Trump at George H.W. Bush's funeral. They didn't say a word to each other when Donald Trump arrived. George W. Bush's spokesman said Trump has never, ever, ever talked about the border wall with George W. Bush, so it certainly wasn't him. That leaves two. Barack Obama's spokesman didn't even comment specifically, instead just saying President Obama is on the record very clearly as saying that walls won't solve the problems that we have today. And then lastly, you have Jimmy Carter, who personally put out a statement saying he's not spoken to Trump about the wall and he opposes the wall. So this is a bold-faced lie. And asked for comment, Donald Trump's acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, said, quote, I have no idea why Trump said this. He hasn't spoken to Donald Trump about it at all. When I read this, I suspected that somewhere you would start to see people saying, well, it must have been George H.W. Bush who passed away recently, and it was him who supported the wall, but now we can't ask him because he's dead. First of all, yeah, right. Secondly, Trump hadn't spoken to George H.W. Bush about this. We know that. And thirdly, that would still only be one president, and Donald Trump said that presidents, plural, told him that they support building this wall. So the lies are becoming more erratic. The lies are becoming more desperate. And as I mentioned before, audacious is the word that I used. I wonder if it was a world leader, but not a former American president who told Trump to build a wall. Might it have been a leader from, I don't know, another country who likes the idea of Trump building a border wall to inflame tensions and divide people, and Trump got confused and said, could have sworn it was an American president who told me to do that. Maybe just an idea. Don't know if there's anything to that. But the pathology of Donald Trump's lies should be apparent to everybody at this point. He is as disconnected from reality as anyone with a serious case of narcissistic personality disorder is. He will say whatever pops into his head, Pat, if he thinks it might reinforce that strong alpha male negotiator, that persona. And just imagine being 72 years old, you've lived the majority of your life, everything you know, everything you've done, everything you believe in, to the extent that Trump has beliefs, gets you to this point of being president of the United States. And you choose to put your eggs in the basket of building a dumb wall, and you find yourself lying in this obvious and demonstrable manner. There's something sad about it beyond being extraordinarily dangerous.
Yeah, he lies for the sake of lying, even when it doesn't get him anywhere. And he lies disregarding how falsifiable the lie is. Like, you only have to interview 4 or 5 people in this case. It reminded me of when he said that after speaking to my generals, I've decided to institute a transgender military ban. At least in that instance, though, you could, like, you know that it wasn't Jim Mattis or John Kelly necessarily, because you can interview those people, but there are so many generals in the United States that maybe on the off chance one of them or 2 of them said that we have to ban trans military members. That would at least make sense. This lie, I think, is a lot more egregious than that.
Yeah, you can't actually go and talk to every military person who might have said that banning trans service members is a good idea. There's 4 former presidents, and them supporting building this harebrained wall would be a big deal. So obviously that's going to be fact-checked. Does it make any difference with his followers? I don't think it does. I think at this point they are so gone, they are so cognitively dissonant that they would rationalize this away any number of different ways that I can imagine, none of which I will even present to you to avoid floating ideas to anybody that might use them. Truly disgusting. I would argue this is the most audacious lie Trump has told so far. If you disagree with me and think that there's been a more desperate, erratic, or audacious lie that he's told, let me know. I'm on Instagram at david.pakman. I hope you're following me there. And the show is on Instagram at David Pakman Show. After the break, part 2 of my interview with Dilbert creator Scott Adams.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're continuing our conversation with Scott Adams, author of many, many books, as well as the creator of the Dilbert comic strip, and increasingly a sort of political, social critic of sorts, I would say. Do you see yourself that way?
Well, I'm an observer, and I like to talk about persuasion in politics more than the just naked politics of it. My book, Win Bigly, is about persuasion and President Trump's persuasion in particular, and I try to put that filter on everything from the economy to immigration to the rest of the stuff.
So to pick up where we left off, we were talking about the tax plan of the president, and we can sort of continue there or look at tariffs, which I know we have to look at sort of separately. But to go back to the sort of main thread that I was pointing to, I'm not seeing the ways in which we can link those policies to what we would call a strong and robust economy beyond your assertion that you made in part one, that we may have expected to see a drop-off in the economic indicators as we moved away from the bottom of a recession. It's a bit arbitrary to say that that should have already happened. I mean, maybe we're a year from that. Maybe we're 3 years from that. The question that I'm pointing to more is, what can we really say empirically about the policy of Donald Trump that proves to us that he has kept that going, other than just saying, well, it hasn't moved the indicators one way or the other?
Yeah, when you're talking about politics and you're talking about economics in particular, there are a lot of variables. And I don't think you can ever get to the point of, yeah, he did this, and so that caused that.
Okay.
You have to sort of look at all the variables, and you have to ask yourself, are they the right decisions? And if they seem right sort of in the abstract, are we seeing a set of results that would be consistent with making right decisions? So, for example, we would imagine that cutting taxes would have a good psychological benefit, and we observed that the consumer confidence, et cetera, were sky high. I think they may have pulled back a little bit because of the stock market, but in general, we saw that it was a decision that should have worked, meaning it should have been good for the economy, and then we see that the economy is good. That's different from saying it caused it.
Well, but
So
I think it's also not, I think you're assuming a lot by merely saying a tax cut increases confidence in the economy. It depends who gets the tax cut, right? Because if people who are very wealthy get a tax cut, and we know that because of the diminishing marginal value, a utility of $1, they're mostly saving that money. I don't know why, again, unless the average middle-class person is an adherent of supply-side economics, why the average middle-class person would say, I'm more confident in the economy because Scott Adams got a tax cut, for example.
Well, the people who are getting tax cuts typically are the ones starting businesses. They're responsible for the largest part of economic activity. So what you would expect is that it would work exactly the way it played out. But your question is more to the psychology.
No, I don't think let me be clear. I don't think it is, because here's where I think we actually disagree on the way that the tax cut works. If you give someone who is already very wealthy, for example, a tax cut, number one, the economic theory of the diminishing marginal utility of money means that $1,000 to them is of far smaller value or utility than $1,000 to someone who makes $30,000. Would we at least both agree with that piece?
Yeah, of course.
We would. Additionally, the person for whom that $1,000 is not really worth very much is not as likely to spend that money as the person who earns $30,000. It's much more likely they would just put that money in a bank account. It's almost like a rounding error for them. They wouldn't even really notice it. Do we agree with that piece?
Yes.
We do. And based on the concept of economic multipliers, we know that someone putting $1,000 in a saving account is not nearly as good for the economy by several orders of magnitude as someone taking that $1,000 and spending it at the grocery store and on a new car and on a vacation. Would we agree with that piece of it?
You're saying $1 spent on expense is better than $1 invested?
I'm saying that saving money in a bank account is not stimulative in the way that, for example, supporting local businesses by buying products and services is.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree.
So therefore, don't we have to come to the conclusion that simply giving a tax cut to rich people is not this obviously great thing for the economy?
Yeah, here's the psychology part of that.
Okay.
What are all of the major news organizations reporting about the tax cut? Because I'm pretty sure that the news, the professionals who essentially assign opinions to the public,
Okay.
because the public doesn't have an independent opinion about the economy. Very few of them have any kind of background in which that would make any sense.
That's fair.
So for economics and politics and any of the big questions in life, our opinions are assigned to us by the people on television, the people in the news, the opinion makers. And the opinion makers are pretty well agreed that tax cuts are stimulative.
So basically you're saying that it almost doesn't matter that giving tax cuts to rich people is not stimulative in the way that giving a middle-class tax cut is. If people believe that it is, then what? People go and spend money they don't actually have because they think tax cuts for rich people are good?
In general, optimism drives the economy. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, I think that optimism by those who are controlling whether the Dow goes up or down does drive the economy. But I'm not sure I've seen any evidence that, Joe Schmo who makes $37,000 a year being optimistic actually drives the economy before just getting Joe to make some bad decisions and going into credit card debt.
So in order for the economy to grow, people have to think that next year is going to be better than this year so that they will invest. So in the investor class, there are people who are investing who maybe would not have otherwise just because of the psychology of it. They've been told, hey, tax cuts. Now, tax cuts, we're talking at it like it's an isolated thing. If everything depended on tax cuts, I'm not sure that would even be enough of a variable to move the world. But we're also talking about a bigger story of regulations being cut. Frankly, I can't think of one regulation specifically that got cut that makes any real world difference. But as long as the president's talking about it and people think that matters, and maybe it does, I don't know, then that's another piece of information that says, oh, optimism. You see him negotiating with other countries. We'll talk about that more. Yeah. But that makes people think, oh, that's a good thing. That's somebody who knows what they're doing. They're playing tough. Might be a little pain in the short run, but should work out. So the president has embarked on a package of influence, if you will, that collectively makes the average person think, I think things are going in the right direction. And
then why does he only have a 38%? If it's the average person who thinks things are going well, why is his approval rating 38%?
Well, his approval rating is not based on the economy alone. If it were, I suppose we'd get different numbers.
But by the way, it is always one of the most important elements for figuring out whether you think the president's doing a good job. Self-reported, people say economy is a top issue.
Do you know the stats offhand? I don't. Of how many people approve of the president's economics?
Not offhand.
It's higher
not offhand.
But it's higher, right?
I'm not sure, honestly.
50%. Right. So if you can get any politician in this country to get a 40 to 50% approval on anything in the year 2019, that's really good, right? Because we have such a team sport thing going on that nobody's going to get 70% approval on anything anymore. Those days are gone. So if you're telling me the president only got 40% or only got 50% approval on a specific thing, my immediate reaction is that's probably about as good as you can do.
I guess that makes it all the more amazing that when you say to people, do you think the government has a duty to provide some basic level of health care, regardless of ability to pay? It's amazing that there's more than 70% on that, isn't it?
Oh, on healthcare, I'm a critic of the president.
Yeah, no, I wasn't implying you weren't. I'm just saying that it's amazing that there's actually 70% is all that more amazing when you consider that.
Here's what's amazing about that number. It's amazing that the Republicans don't have a plan, even a bad plan. Just any kind of a frickin' plan is, I would say, it's unforgivable. I mean, it's horrible. So
don't disagree there.
I'm a strong critic of that. That is one of the few cases where we can all agree. And I think the 70% gets to the fact that nobody's got an idea how to fix this, but everybody wants it fixed.
I had a whole bunch of other stuff to ask about politically, but we're sort of short on time. So one thing I wanted to mention is this morning you tweeted that the shutdown is a Nancy Pelosi tantrum and that she can't let Trump win. I'm curious about that. I mean, if one believes that the wall is the wrong way to spend money and is ineffective, why should she give the guy money for it? And as far as it being a Pelosi tantrum, talk about what you mean by that, because Trump said he would shut it down and he did. How does that make it a Pelosi tantrum? I don't get that.
That was a Twitter comment, which of course are always a little bit of hyperbole, but I'll give you the more legitimate answer.
All right.
Both Pelosi and Trump have the power to open the government. All they'd have to do is give the other one whatever it is that they want. So it's not one person close the government. Both of them have to disagree with the other side. So it's kind of a tie.
No,
if you're being
Scott,
fair about it.
No. That is not fair. If there's a negotiation, a divorce negotiation, and one party, I know you don't like analogies, but I'll make one. And one party goes to the other and says, "Hey, listen, I want 99% of all of your future earnings," and the other party says, "No, I'm not going to do that."
Well, here's why I don't like analogies.
You've said that because they weren't able to agree, they're equally responsible, but that's not actually the case. Donald Trump said, "I will shut it down if I don't get money for the wall," and that's what he wanted, and that's not. There's no expectation that he's supposed to get what he wants.
Well, keep in mind that we have two sides that are actually in complete agreement. So if, like your analogy of the married couple who are getting the divorce, they're in disagreement. So in that case, one of them could actually be to blame for any impasse because they're disagreeing.
Okay.
Both Republicans and Democrats have agreed that engineers, they don't say these words and they should, but engineers need to decide, where do you put a fence? Where do you put some drones? Where do you put more of a solid structure? Or is it more sensible and economical? And does it meet the specs better to put a steel slat structure? I think you would agree that Democrats, at least the Pelosi types, are not open borders people. They would like a competent border security. And in the past, they have been okay with various fancy, wall-like structures and have even funded them as recently. So to imagine that these two groups have an actual disagreement, I don't think you can claim that in any genuine sense.
No,
this is not a real.
I think you can, and I think here's why. I'm not an open borders person. I don't think that there is actually the immigration crisis that Trump and some on the right describe. And the reasons why are, number one, we have a net outflow of undocumented immigrants to Mexico. Number two, economically, we know that undocumented immigrants are paying into welfare systems they will never get benefits back out of. Number three, undocumented immigrants commit crime at lower rates than American-born citizens. So it's not that I can't figure out what it is that the border should be, engineers, slats, or concrete, or whatever. It's that I think this is a solution to a problem that has been blown up. 2/3 of undocumented immigrants are here on overstayed visas. So I think that Nancy Pelosi's position is not incoherent, that she doesn't think we should have open borders, but she thinks $25 billion in total or $5 billion initially for this wall is not a good idea. I think that's coherent.
Which part of that do you think Trump disagrees with?
He believes that this is an acute crisis. He believes that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at higher rates than American-born citizens. I mean, I think he disagrees with almost everything.
Wait. Let's take one at a time.
Yeah.
You think he thinks that American-born people who are not documented commit crimes at a higher rate than the rest of citizens?
No, not American-born people. I'm talking about, he said many times that the sort of criminal character is how he has described undocumented immigrants, and the data, it's not my opinion.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Right, but hold on. I don't believe he's given conflicting data when I hear the Republican opinion on this, which, by the way, I don't completely buy into that side of the opinion.
Okay.
But when I hear the opinion, what I hear is, why would we let one crime in if we could prevent it. Like,
yeah,
it's
but
not a percentage question.
that's not an adult way to actually think about it, right? This is sort of any time that government has to establish or law enforcement has to establish a system for dissuading an action that we don't want, you can always say, let's go to the next level and next level until 0 people are the ones that are doing this thing that we don't want done. But at a certain point, you do have to evaluate what is the cost and what is the benefit. I don't think that's crazy, right? I mean, if the wall were to cost $200 billion to prevent 100 people from crossing illegally, would we still be saying that it's worth it?
No.
We wouldn't.
No.
Yeah. So at a certain point, we have to say, okay, well, 25 billion when there's a net outflow. What is the limit is the question.
Well, you're giving me lots of different topics, and I want to at least drill down on any one of them.
Sure.
The question about the net outflows doesn't get to the fact that there are, a number of people coming in that cause problems.
Sure.
And wouldn't it be better if they could all come in, but under a legal system where we know who it is and we make sure they're part of the process?
That's fair.
Remember, the Republican point of view is not stop people from coming in. That's not the view. The view is, can't we find a way to force them to come in legally so that the system is working for them the same way it's working for the citizens?
Yeah, that's the most sanitized version that we've sometimes heard. But then when we remember, well, we want people from Norway rather than shithole countries, and they're not sending their best, they're sending criminals and rapists, and some I'm sure are good people, and 2/3 are not coming in. But hold on. And 2/3 are not actually crossing the border. I don't know how all of that gets us to the solution's a $25 billion wall.
Let me just pick off your worst part of thinking in that statement. The fact that the vast majority of people come in through overstayed visas is not in any way connected to whether you should have good border security. Because the fact that somebody might burglarize my home doesn't stop me from not wanting to be mugged in my car. I mean, they're just different things.
They're different things, but they're not in the sense that if what we're trying to do is to most quickly and most efficiently get ourselves to the fewest number of undocumented immigrants in the country, you would deal with the worst problem first. And it just so happens that the one that represents 2/3 rather than 1/3 could be dealt with in ways that would be far less controversial and much easier politically to deal with.
Wait, are you saying that there's an easy solution to the 2/3 visa overstays?
I'm not saying it's an easy solution, but what I am saying is that it would be much simpler politically.
No, how about you're saying there's no solution? So you have one big problem, the visa overstays, and one smaller problem. The smaller problem has, in the opinion of Republicans, a reasonably normal, obvious way to fix it, which is improving border security. You can argue about the technique. The visa overstays, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't have a solution.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think no one? Why do you think there isn't?
Let me finish the thought. There might be, but let me finish the thought. There, in no way would you not solve the smaller problem that you can solve just because there exists a problem you can't solve elsewhere. I mean, that makes no sense at all.
No, I think that the characterization of that argument implies that because we haven't seen a focus politically on the 2/3, that we just don't know how to do it. That the reasons are political. The wall is something that is a sort of metaphor for Trump being strong and Republicans being strong, saying instead, we're going to focus on what is actually the bigger problem here. It's not a winner politically. There's no imagery associated with it that's beneficial for Trump to say, we're going to, I guess, focus more on enforcing overstayed visas. It's not sexy. That's why they're not talking about it.
No, I think they're not talking about it because nobody has a suggestion.
No, I don't think so.
If you have, really? How come we don't know it? It's the biggest problem in immigration, and neither of us have even heard a suggested solution.
But
I haven't heard one.
Are you saying that the reason we haven't heard of how to deal with that is simply that no one has any ideas? It's because politically there's no benefit to talking about it.
I think that's a stretch.
I don't
because
think so.
It seems to be, you think if the president couldn't easily solve 2/3 of the illegal immigration problem, you think he wouldn't do it?
There's no benefit to the imagery and image that he wants to develop by talking about this wall. He's the builder. Mexico will pay for it. That is politically beneficial in a way that dealing with the not sexy 2/3 of overstayed visas is simply not. That's just the reality.
No, that's not the reality. Those are two separate problems. One has an obvious solution and one doesn't. That's all I see.
Okay, well, I also don't think that the wall is the obvious solution. I think it's not a good solution, but I don't think we're going to agree on that element of this either.
Oh, no, wait, we're not disagreeing on the wall. I think the wall, I think you would agree we need some border security, and that you and I and politicians are not the ones to decide where do you put a wall, where do you put electronic surveillance. Would you agree? We're probably on exactly the same side there.
think that the idea, I've seen you float this idea that, quote, engineers should decide. This is more than just do you use see-through slats or concrete and how many miles do you build. Engineers can certainly make recommendations on that. They can't weigh the cost of that versus the benefit and the political alternatives that also exist. I think it's fine to ask engineers about rebar versus concrete, but I don't think engineers have the solution here.
No, engineers do look at the economics, so they would look at all the solutions. So they don't just make materials decisions. They are primarily in the job of what's the best way to make it work to your specifications. The specifications would include being able to see through it, which might lead them toward a metal, a steel solution instead of concrete, and that'd be fine.
Okay, but whether you can see through the border wall or not doesn't tell us in the context of the number of people that are coming in, what this would cost in total, and all of the other considerations, whether it should be done at all.
Well, they're going to start with the specs, and the specifications would be something like, we have to see through it, we have to be able to build it in these places, and it should stop 90% of the people who might try to get over it. So something like that would be the specs. And then the engineers would say, okay, best way to do that is steel slats or concrete, or in these places, we don't need it. Just put some fence there. Israel's wall is mostly fence. A lot of people don't know that. So, and in Israel, the decision about where to put a wall and where to put a fence has more to do with how much width you have on the border to work with. If you have a lot of space, then a fence with, electronic means and stuff works great. But let's say you're in a populated area where you don't have enough space to build, on either side of the wall, then the wall is sort of your default.
Yeah, but
so
but Scott, what this doesn't tell us is whether we should be working on the wall versus something totally different altogether in dealing with this problem or others. That's the point I'm trying to make. I don't think it's even really a controversial one.
Well, but that's like saying, why would we work on the wall when people are still getting speeding tickets? They're just different. Why don't you solve all the problems?
No, they're not at all, because local police, there is a limited amount. That's local police departments work on speeding tickets and how to set speed limits. When it comes to federal government priorities, there is some limit both to the amount of legislative time, political capital, and funding. You grant that that's different than just saying people speed in Boston, so why are we talking about a wall?
I rest my case that analogies never persuade anybody, as my analogy completely failed because you just pick out the differences and focus on them.
Yes,
the point is
victim of your own analogy, I guess.
All right. But the point is, the immigration is a big topic.
Yeah.
But you can break it into subtopics. People coming across borders, people doing visa overstays. Because you don't have a solution for one part of it, is in no way evidence or logical. It does not logically suggest that you should not solve the part you can solve. And that's actually the argument I'm hearing. And my mind just goes blah, 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 when I hear that, because there's just no connective tissue to that thought.
All right.
You solve the problems you can solve.
Well, I think that we would only be continuing to disagree on the same point. So let's wrap up with just one last thing, which is Mexico's obviously not paying for the wall, right?
Not in any direct way that I could see, no.
No. Okay. It's always nice to end on a point of agreement. Scott Adams, creator of the world-famous Dilbert comic strip. If I was ever written into the comic strip as a character, even as a horrible person, it would still be an incredible thing. And maybe someday we will see that. Scott Adams, always great to talk to you.
All right, great to talk to you. Thanks for this conversation.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Mark Ledwich collected a ton of interesting data about YouTube channels, and you might remember that one of the discussions taking place in the sort of YouTube sphere is the question of, does the right crush the left on YouTube? I did a live stream with Secular Talk's Kyle Kolinsky about this about a year and a half ago or so, and there have been some corporate media articles written that make the claim that even on YouTube, it's not just on talk radio, it's not on whatever platform, that even on YouTube, the political right is crushing the political left. And I want to go through some of the interesting things that came from the data compiled by Mark Ledwich. And one really interesting aspect of what he was able to uncover is which channels recommend our content and which channels are recommended by our videos. Take a look at this. And it's important to note that these estimates were done in a sort of manual way. This is not a fully comprehensive analytics report, but it's still interesting. So what this tells us is which channels' videos are we showing up as recommendations for? So if you're watching, for example, Stephen Colbert, how frequently is YouTube's algorithm saying, if you like this video, we're going to recommend videos from, for example, The David Pakman Show. Additionally, which channels are recommended to people watching our videos? So if you're watching a David Pakman Show YouTube clip, how often is the recommended clip a Sam Cedar clip or a Ring of Fire clip? And interestingly, we received a ton of recommended video views from Stephen Colbert, followed by Seth Meyers, then the Young Turks, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, Secular Talk with Kyle Kolinsky, Trevor Noah's program, Bill Maher, and NBC News. That's on the left side of this graphic. On the right side, these are outbound recommendations. Our YouTube channel recommended to people, sent viewers to the Young Turks, CNN, MSNBC, Sam Cedar, Stephen Colbert, Fox News, the one right-wing media outlet there, probably because we critique them and the algorithm is saying it seems like related content, Ring of Fire, something called Tony's 24/7 Eyes, which I've never heard of, Seth Meyers, and Trevor Noah. Very, very interesting sort of sphere of influence on YouTube that we are sort of in the middle of there. There's another interesting graphic which aggregates left and right-wing views on YouTube and left and right-wing channels. And what's fascinating about this one, and if you're just listening to me describe this, I hope I'm doing an okay job. What's fascinating about this graphic is that while there are way more right-wing channels than left-wing channels, in terms of video views, left-wing channels actually significantly outdo not only right-wing channels, but left-wing YouTube channels actually get more views than right-wing and centrist YouTube channels combined. So when we say the left dominates the right or the right dominates the left on YouTube, there is no question based on that data that there are way more right-wing channels on YouTube, but the left-wing channels are more successful in terms of the audience that they bring. What are the takeaways from this in terms of what needs to happen? I have no idea. I mean, of course, I think there's a couple different things going on. One is that corporate media and talk radio are so overwhelmingly right-wing and corporatist that there may be a sort of self-selection where it's not that the right can't succeed on a platform like YouTube, it's that there's more appetite for alternatives to right-wing and sort of corporatist centrist views, and people are finding a lot of those on YouTube. So I don't think that this tells us, Pat, you know, causation and correlation are two different things. We can't look at this data and say, this is because YouTube as a platform inherently lends itself more to left-wing views rather than right-wing views. Because along the same lines, there's way more conspiracy channels on YouTube than you see on talk radio or corporate media. That's simply because it's an open platform and there is a sort of self-selection bias at play. But for me, the biggest takeaway from this, Pat, was it's not true that the right is crushing the left on YouTube.
Can it tell us at all that the David Pakman Show has recently been crushing it on YouTube, getting several million views a week, maybe the most successful we've been, at least since the last election? Or is that a different thing altogether?
Yeah, I think we're going to need to commission a custom study to demonstrate that. And that would be very useful for me to do rants and raves justifying people signing up for membership. But yeah, I mean, I love that you're bringing that up. But unfortunately, this study does not particularly tell us that. The real question that surfaces from the data is, how does that YouTube algorithm actually work? We don't exactly know. And it's one of the most closely guarded sort of trade secrets that YouTube has, in the same way that how the Google search algorithm works is a very closely guarded secret that has so many factors that impact it that it would be hard to even sum up. But very interesting data from Mark Ledwich, and I really appreciate him putting it together. We have a voicemail number, but today, instead of a voicemail, I have an email from a viewer that I want to read to you. By the way, please send me your pictures wearing David Pakman Show gear, with David Pakman Show coffee, with your David Pakman Show coffee mugs or bumper stickers or whatever. We want to start publishing some of those to our social media. David@davidpakman.com. Okay, if you have any David Pakman Show gear, photograph yourself with it, send it to me. David@davidpakman.com, so we can put it on social media. Okay, Leslie wrote to me. Leslie says, I think the American people should not have to pay federal taxes during a government shutdown of any kind. Trump needs to feel the sting of his actions financially. Regards, Leslie. That is a double-edged sword. On the on the one hand, it's true that it seems sort of incoherent that we have the government shut down and a whole bunch of government money is not being spent on programs because of the shutdown, but everybody still has to pay the exact same amount of federal taxes. That seems sort of incoherent. It's also kind of incoherent how the anti-tax right that has positions ranging from it's your money and you should get to keep as much of it as possible, all the way to the extreme cartoonish libertarian view of taxes are illegal. They are not making this argument when it's at least Donald Trump that has shut the government down, which further exposes the lack of coherence and the fact that this is merely a political ploy, period. But there are real consequences to the shutdown. And I actually, you know me, Pat, I am not one of these anti-tax for no reason other than just being anti-tax crusaders. But I do think that there is something to Leslie's idea that the government's not spending money. If government functions aren't actually being carried out, that's why we pay taxes. Why does everybody have to keep paying their taxes at the same rate?
We've talked about how there's really no sense of urgency during government shutdowns because only 15% of the government shuts down. The military keeps operating. People still get their Social Security checks, all that stuff. If you were to shut down some of those services, I think that the government would open up right away. And similarly, if people were to stop paying their taxes, I think the same thing would happen.
There is no doubt whatsoever. And this is why if we're really shutting down government, then maybe it should really get shut down. And that would probably prevent shutdowns from happening in the future with this frequency. We've got a great bonus show for you today. We'll talk about Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer demanding equal time in parallel to Donald Trump's commandeering of American television for the purposes of scaring people about the non-existent undocumented immigrant crisis. We'll talk about much more, all of that on today's bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.